Okay, welcome back to the Jiu Jitsu Mindset. It's Pete Daly going solo again. Professor Lucas is enjoying the company of his newborn Gabriel. So he and his lovely wife, Paula, are appropriately focused on the brand new little guy. Um, However, as you know, parenting can be an exhausting business, and their house is stocked up with submission coffee, and you may want to get yours too. So you can get that at jujitsumindset.com, where you can also join the mailing list. For you competitors out there, it's still not classified as a performance enhancing drug. So you're safe to drink as much as you want. The divine looks so well upon us every week. We're talking to some amazing person. And again, we're back at the table of somebody just remarkable. So I'm excited to have this conversation. And Professor Alex Darwin, thank you for spending time with us. I'm just grateful that you're here.
Thanks for having me, Pete. I'm really glad to be here.
So you have a unique story from my point of view. You've got a lot of interesting things that your life's taken a variety of different roads, seemingly all at the same time. Too, I mean, entrepreneur and author, business owner. I mean, a jujitsu professor. There's a lot. There's this podcast could be a couple of days long if I indulged all of my questions, which I
Let's
will.
do it. Let's do
Yeah, so
it.
I'll send you that submission coffee immediately. But I like to begin with the notion of what jujitsu had jujitsu not come into your life, how would this, variety of things that your life is comprised of now be different had you not taken on the dedication of becoming a jujitsu professor?
Yeah, no, I think in many ways, jujitsu came first for me, and in fact, my career as an author, I think would I can't even see it happening to a large extent. I mean, I've always loved writing, and I would like to think that I would have found my way to being an author without, but the reality is, jujitsu had a direct path to my book, and it actually is a direct tie to the series itself. My series is called The Combat Codes, and the basic premise of it is a world where instead of geopolitical diplomacy, you have one-on-one combat, which is mixed martial arts, unarmed combat that decides the fate of nations. So instead of sending like diplomats or having wars with thousands and millions of people dying in this dystopian world, each nation just has champions that represent them, and there's a ton of jujitsu in this books. Actually, the roots of the books and the fans of the books at the start were a lot of jujitsu practitioners, and I use jujitsu and judo and martial arts terminology in it, and people that are familiar with combat sports as well. So yeah, it really was tied directly to my love of jiu-jitsu. I was thinking when I was writing the story, how can I write a fantasy book, which, I really love sci-fi and fantasy. That's what I read and read, and write. How can I write a story that revolves around mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu, and this was the product. And it did turn out that it had appeal to people outside of the jiu-jitsu world. I
Yeah.
tried to really describe techniques as you would instructing a white belt of day one white belt,
Yeah.
where you
Nice.
need to really break things down and not get overly complicated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the themes of the podcast has been the metaphorical nature of what we're doing on the mats and how that carries us off the mats. And so
Mm.
to write about how those ideas could then extend in this imaginative world to how things could get solved at scale, or how you might deal with issues at scale, to me is fascinating. As an artist and effectively a professional athlete. I mean, as somebody who teaches, I mean, like
I wouldn't go that far, Pete, but I mean, I'm getting a little older. I'm in my mid 40s now. Well, not mid 40s, early 40s,
right.
but I've been doing this for so long, for over 20 years now.
Yeah.
And you have these kids that are coming up, and they are pro athletes and they live an athletic style. But I do live and breathe to a certain extent.
So, yeah, so I guess I mentioned it from this point of view. Like, I think that the artist life and the martial artist life have similarities. I think that
Mm.
you often are required in both disciplines to practice to um, work on improvement without evidence necessarily or feedback of improvement. So I was just interested in sort of your development as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, particularly since you began as a young man, and your development as an artist. Did the disciplines inform each other? Like, were you more disciplined as an artist because you had started this physical
Yeah.
discipline, and then did the physical discipline help you be more disciplined as an artist?
Oh, 100%, certainly. So, I think I was never, an athletic kid. I was never,
Okay,
I was a dorky, nerdy kid who loved Dungeons& and Dragons and reading fantasy books and writing. And I
right.
was living in these imaginary worlds. And, I started getting interested in martial arts because I loved kung fu movies
Hmm.
that sort of thing. And it wasn't until I found, jujitsu when I was, 20 years old, and it was literally a lightning strike where, my first instructor was a lot smaller than me, and I had that experience that many people did where you felt like you're this person was just controlling your body effortlessly,
Yeah.
and it was akin to magic. Again, I grew up in these worlds where I love magic and swords and sorcery, and this was the equivalent of what I had been seeking, which is there's actually magic in our real world,
How
and
nice.
I never turned back. And so the thing that, as someone who didn't grow up as an athlete, the thing that jujitsu gave me was something that, you might get from a lot of athletics, which was discipline. Being able, if I wanted to get better at this magical skill, I needed to put the mat time in. I needed to put those hours in. And that's what I dedicated myself to. And, back then I trained a lot more. It was 5, 6 times a week. And I love spending so much time in the mat. And you could get over injuries so fast.
Yeah, yeah,
Those were the days. And and definitely as far as that translating to, a work ethic for writing, I think a lot of people look at writing or arts in general as a skill that you just have. I think especially people, on the outside, they see, art as something that you just suddenly are good at, or you have a innate ability, for this. And that, in my opinion, at least for me, is not the case whatsoever. You need discipline and you need to put your pen on the paper and as you would have to be um getting on the mats every
yeah,
day, you have to work at it. And it really is, especially with writing, in my experience, it's a constant learning experience. There's you're never the journey is never over as far as the learning.
yeah. Yeah, I that notion of, um, pursuit without a true end line, I think in jujitsu compared to even other athletic pursuits where there might be more obvious demarcations of I've arrived. If you're an NBA athlete and you win the championship of it, there's a certain like arc of that story for that season that you're now like the clearly the best, at least as a team in that. Whereas
I think
jiu
actually, I think people run into trouble with that, and I think you're exactly right. Because I was actually just talking to a friend about the difference between a martial artist and an athlete. And I think athletes run into trouble, especially if you see these like UFC champs and they're looking at it as a purely athletic endeavor and they hit the top. They hit the
right,
very
yeah,
top. They become the champ. And then you just see over and over, they run into so much trouble where there's nowhere to go. And
right, right, right,
they don't know what to do. But then you have guys like GSP,
right, yes,
who consider themselves martial artists, and they're able to get out at the right time. They don't keep coming back to try to be the champ. They know when to get out, and then they are able to continue their learning journey. Like you look at GSP, he's still trying to he's training with like Danaher and that
sure.
squad. And he's always trying to learn, and he seems like he's doing all right. He didn't reach that plateau and be like, "What am I going to do now with my life?"
Yes, right. Well, I mean, for me, the artistic pursuit is one in which there's no finish line. This is a as long as you're alive, if you're an artist, you can continue to refine your craft. And for me, I think you're right. There's this notion that artists are creating what they're creating based on a flourish of inspiration rather than a day in and day out grind of like trying to build something worth bringing into the world. Um, and as, a beginning jujitsu, person, one of the things that, uh, if I was concerned about the outcome, I would have quit already, right? Like I just I enjoy the process, and at my age in particular, like the competitive experiences are not going to inform my opinion of like, am I getting better per se? I just want to be in a mix of it. So I don't know, I find that a fascinating corollary. And when you think about skill acquisition, I mean, here we're talking about the discipline of having to put pen to paper and the discipline to get on the mat. But do you think that the acquisition of jujitsu skills are different in some way than the acquisition of other skills?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's the body mind connection and there's the athletic portion of it. And so, of course, if you go into jiu-jitsu from perspective of like it's going to purely be this mental chess, and yes, it is mental chess, but it's also using your full body. And so
Right.
that's where I think some people can fall off in the start because your adrenaline is pumping and you are going full flight or fight mode
Right.
and every muscle in your body is strained. And when you get out of there, you feel like you've been through, you've been run over by a tractor,
Yeah.
literally.
Right.
So there certainly is that aspect of it. But once you get over that initial hurdle, once your body becomes somewhat familiar with that pain and being uncomfortable and being smashed
Mm.
quite a bit, then it does become kind of that mental chess of skill acquisition and going down the rabbit hole of trying to determine what your game is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes there's a bit of missed messages as that come to particularly those of us that are at the beginning where they're like, "Hey, strength doesn't matter. It's all about technique and so on
Yeah.
and so forth."
Okay.
And while yes, like a perfect technique will likely overcome a much stronger opponent, the idea that like, "Hey, this isn't being a strong person matters."
Oh
like,
yeah,
like
right. And
this is not just a cerebral experience, and the position and leverage of your body. Yes, it's true, but the skill required for that to play out is meaningful.
yes.
Like it's not something that happens very quickly, if not at all. I was listening to Hodger Gracie talk about his cross collar choke, and he was talking about how it really didn't become what it was until many years after his black belt. And so what might be considered something that, we begin teaching pretty early in the experience that, in the greatest of all times, if not the great, I mean, whatever you want to call him, uh, talking about that move, not really getting dialed in until well after his black belt is just interesting to me
Yeah, no, I could
and
watch his
comforting, right?
cross collar choke all day.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying, I agree. Like it's a thing that engages the brain and engages the body, and that is I find that there's few experiences in life that does those two things and is dependent on another human being. Like
Yeah.
I can shoot baskets all day or kick soccer goals and be, you know,
Right.
improving that, but I need another person on the mat with me. I find that to be a different
Right. I
qualification.
find now that jujitsu has gotten so big, there's a lot of different people in it. And what I don't like is I find there's a lot of cynicism where you have people that are saying this changed my life and this has made me a better person. This made me healthy. This is all of the above, all the great things. And then you have this kind of counterpoint that's like, no, you could just be doing CrossFit. No, you could just be doing running and biking. And I actually disagree. And yes, you can find the best in any of these activities. And sure, they all have a lot of benefits. But I think jujitsu is very special in that it combines exactly what you're saying, which is this constant learning and mental aspect of it with
Mhm.
extremely, difficult physical endeavor. And then combine that with the being in close contact with other humans and like fulfilling that, touch, sensory, whatever you want to play. Look at it like the way mammals are kind of meant to play with each other. All of the above, it's like, no, actually, this is something unique. And I feel like I can say that not just from having, been obsessed with this for so long.
Yes, and I think the overlay of there a dangerous component to it in that trust element, that training with somebody that could hurt you, particularly when you're being instructed, but even with your, equally skilled training partner, that aspect of it too isn't found other places. Like, having
Yeah,
been,
100%.
right? I mean, that's
Yes.
different. Well, I mean, as it comes to that, I'm curious about what you feel the role of competition is in the development of, the jujitsu athlete, because people come
Yeah.
in and they're chasing various different types of experiences, or they don't know what they're chasing and they're there just to kind of experiment. But as you go along, most gyms are going to ask the question, do you want to do this
You
competition
Yep.
or not? So how does that play
Yeah.
into the
No, and
development?
so I definitely don't consider myself a competitor by any means. I have competed. I've made sure to try to compete once at every belt. And to be honest, I never enjoyed competition. And there's a
Right.
few specific reasons. I didn't like how it felt to train for competition. And I'm yes,
Yeah.
because it was very hard. Um, Competition training, stresses me out a bit. I find myself, not playing like the way I love to do jiu-jitsu, and I find myself, you know, in kind of a learning mode is very playful.
Right.
And that doesn't mean I'm not training hard. That doesn't
Sure.
mean I'm not attacking or training hard. I like to play, and be creative, so to speak. And you can't, the good thing about competition is you can't do that. You go to your A game. You are playing, depending on the rule set, you are playing a very specific game that you need to adhere to. Because again, the goal of competition is not to play, it's to win.
Right.
And yeah, there's different rule sets. There's sub only and there's points. I'm primarily was doing point competition, like IBJJF type of thing. And yeah, so I didn't like the way that training for competition made me feel. However, that being said, it's certainly when you do put yourself out there and do the proper training and you compete, it does level you up, so to speak.
Yeah.
That almost always what I've seen in myself as well as students is you kind of hit your like nothing to do with belts, you hit your next level because you put yourself out there, because you put the hours sharpening your A game.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
you're not competition is not skill acquisition. When you're training, you're working on your cardiovascular endurance and you're working on sharpening your A game primarily.
Right.
And so that in itself is very valuable. As to whether it is something that everyone should do, it's like it really just depends on what you're getting out of jujitsu at this point. If you're just on at jujitsu, and it depends where you are in life, your age, your like. I don't think anyone should become to jujitsu and saying I have to compete by any means.
Right.
At
Right.
least again, if you're getting over an injury or you just had a kid and you're kind of like
Yeah. Yeah.
don't like beat yourself up over not competing. But if you're the type of person that wants to like test yourself, outside of the gym, people that don't necessarily train with you regularly don't know your technique. You want to see what your technique holds up. You want to have that flight fight response, which it will give you. Like you can get
Yes.
very comfortable in the gym, and that's great. But competition will give you that adrenaline kick, and you'll see how you handle that. That's all very important if that's what you want to do. The other thing that you need to keep in mind if you're going to compete is like the only way to get better at competing is by competing.
Yes. Right.
And
Right.
and so like also keep that in mind. Like the competitors that will do well are the ones that they're like, oh, this is just another weekend. I compete every weekend. And
Right.
so if you're just starting out competing, like you will be up against them and that's fine. But keep that in mind.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I think self-mastery is the primary virtue of competition for the person who's not interested in becoming a world champion. Like if you want to train and
Right.
you were like your goal is to win frequently, that's one thing. But the being nervous, being anxious, and then trying to master that to me is sort of uh the way that I would encourage some. And I see it through the prism of somebody who started when they were 50, which is different. Because if I had come to this earlier in my life, and I think, the only blessing to not finding it earlier is I would have had a very different attitude about it. I would have seen it as much
Right.
more something that I wanted to be good relative to other people.
Right.
Where I
I
sit
think I
now.
think I love that, when folks find jujitsu later, they're always like, "I wish I'd found this earlier." You don't know how that would have affected you. Maybe you start jujitsu when you're 15 years old and you hate it because, it feels like too much pressure and you quit when you're 22 and you never do it again,
Right.
right? Like, you don't know how that story ends, and so, like, you found it when you found it, and yeah, actually some of the older guys who I train with that started later in life, their bodies are not as beat up. Those guys who've been training like myself for so
Sure.
long, I'm
Yeah,
like the guys who've been training forever, they're walking around like every single like getting in and out of the car, picking up their kid. It's like,
sure. So when you think about, if I'm to ask you like what's your most memorable either competition or just like hard roll or whatever, what 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 springs to mind? Like what is there a
yo,
story
just
around?
rolling with your heroes. Like I got a chance to roll with Ryan Hall, who's one of my heroes, awesome guy, and just like being able to train with someone like that is
Yeah,
always just amazing. I mean, of course, like, and Ryan is so technical. The thing people don't realize about him is he's like can smash you and mount like these guys that you think are like, oh, they're known for leg locks, and then you're like under mount, and it's like feels like you're getting crushed by a bulldozer.
yeah, yeah,
And these are not big guys. That to me, just based on my initial experience with jiu-jitsu and seeing magic, that further reinforces my
yeah,
notion of like, this is as close as we get to magic. And the
yeah,
fact that I'm like, I am not a professional, like I've been doing it for a long time. I can hold my own, but the fact that there's these people out here that have, mastered this to the next level, there
yes,
are levels to this. That makes me happy. That
yeah,
makes
yeah,
me,
yeah,
it doesn't make me be like, I'm never going to be like that. It just makes me so happy to know that there's this strength and skill and technique acquisition that I can keep, at least striving for.
sure.
In competition, I competed against the podcaster Lex Friedman, which had brown belt, which was really fun. He's got a really he won on points. Um, in the gi at brown belt. He has an extremely solid game, and he comes from a judo background. And he has a body type. I'm sure people have rolled with people like him, where it's like stocky, like
Uh-huh.
there's no arms or legs that are long enough to like take anything, and those people are difficult. Especially, I'm a lanky guy.
Right.
That's like my though that body type is my nemesis. Like
Mhm.
they're as and weight the weight is the same,
Sure.
but they just are like stocky,
Yeah, it's
right?
distributed
So
differently.
yeah, distributed differently. It's hard to get legs or arms or even a neck. So yeah, those were, I think, memorable, but there's been so many over the years, and
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like even my regular training partners, are I love to roll with.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's my probably my primary training partner is a gentleman named Han. When you talk about play, like he's much. We started roughly around the same time, but he's much better than I am, and but I find um that experience of having somebody do something effortless versus somebody who like crushes you with that like they're yes, they're better and they're stronger, and so it just is sort of overwhelming. But to have someone like maybe smaller than you just effortlessly turn you and feel so heavy, I think is when you talk about magic, that's my experience too. Well, I'm sure over 20 years you have a ton of those stories. And Lex Friedman, someone that I listen to, it's fun to hear kind of a name I recognize and always wondered like I wonder how his jujitsu is. But
He definitely has good jujitsu, yeah, for sure.
yeah, that's cool. Other stories that might, I'd like to ask you about is your observation of how maybe a particular student or somebody might have been affected by jujitsu in their time with you and your gym. As what you got one that comes to mind as a special
And there's
story?
so many specific stories, but again, a lot of the ones that I really love are people that have found jujitsu later in life. Because you have these kids that are teenagers, and you can see them coming up, and
Yeah.
they're getting better, and that's wonderful too. And you see like how that's affecting them. And I always think, I wish had done this when I was a teenager, instead of getting bullied and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
those are wonderful stories. But the ones that I find almost the most inspiring are guys or girls that are starting it, putting themselves out there, and it's a next chapter in their life, and they're starting it. And I have, again, a ton of training partners where they found jujitsu later,
Mhm.
and it's really become their, we talked about in the beginning of this, the different benefits between the mental and the physical, and then the kind of social
Yeah.
aspect, because it's a sport you do with other humans. I think what I see become what's called a third place,
Yeah.
for someone outside of their home and their work, which is all they really have had for a long time, and now they're kind of being, you know, embraced into a group, a tribe, whatever you want to call it, that
Mhm.
has been missing from their life. And that was definitely the case for me to some extent. And you don't even have to put words to this. You just see it when they
Yeah.
show up
Right.
and how they're acting around other people, and kind of the happiness that exudes from them on the mats every day. And they're just like positive attitudes. And again, the reason I'm not talking about one specific story is because it's a lot
Yeah.
of these stories. And again, it doesn't have to be older guys or girls. It could be someone that's, you know, just especially to be honest, for men, I think it's harder for men to make friends after school or college or whatever.
Right.
Men tend to just be at work and then at home if they have a family. And then it's very difficult for men. Again, I don't want to single out men. It can be difficult for women too, but uh, I think there is a prevalence where men have a hard time again making friends. Like, hey, do you want to go out for a drink or something?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
And jujitsu again, how often I've seen this, and it could be for people that are ex-military or law enforcement or even you see so many wrestlers who like after their wrestling career, whether it be college or high school, they're
Right.
kind of just like wandering around aimlessly. That was such a big part. And there's
Sure.
nothing you can do with wrestling if you're not like going to be a coach or a UFC fighter.
Right.
And like how many wrestlers are just wandering around aimlessly seeking what they've had and then they find the jiu-jitsu gym and their eyes light up and they smash like the white belt and everyone's like, "Oh," but, like,
Yeah.
they're so happy. Like, if they find it with the right attitude, they're just so happy, and again, it's about finding that 3rd place, and I love to
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And it's for me, it's always apparent in about 90 seconds into a role if somebody had wrestled sometime in their life.
Yeah.
Like even if they wrestled as like a 10-year-old, they just have a different proprioception than the rest of us. They understand it
Yeah,
much
well, it's
more
most
naturally.
of us
Yeah.
are not growing up, grappling is a very specific, movement and body type and moving another human, and so judokas are grapplers, really. Wrestlers are grapplers. I always have to remind my students that you might be like a blue belt that have done jiu-jitsu for 3 years, and then you have some D1 wrestler go in and smash you, and they're like, "Hey, coach, what happened there? I feel bad about myself." And I'm like, "Dude, that guy's been training for 15 years.
That's
It's
right. There's a lot
grappling.
of mat time.
Grappling is
Yeah.
grappling. Like you're
Yeah.
changing the rule sets, you're wearing different uniforms. It's grappling."
Right. Right. Yeah, I think, the Professor Lucas and I started the podcast with 2 intentions. We wanted to have people not quit. Like, we just saw too many people, they get their blue belt, we call it the blue belt curse around here, and they're off
Mm,
they go. And you feel like, you're just getting your ABCs, you don't really like, you give up too early on it. And then other people on the outside of the mats are looking, going, "Oh, is this really for me or not?" To kind of push them uh, into the experience that, hey, the water's fine. Come on in. You'll be surprised that, how comfortable you actually are. But I think, come to the jujitsu, stay for the people is many, many people's experience that, their third place idea. And the way in which you get revealed to a person in a sort of pure way, because in that moment
mm,
that you're not thinking, you're just whoever you are, and I think that most of us, our experience day in and day out is, we're in our minds doing our things and we're, rarely released from the monkey mind sort of endless treadmill. But when
mm.
someone's trying to choke you, all of a sudden you're in the moment, I mean, it's a different,
Yeah.
I think it's a time of the day that isn't like other times. Well, where might somebody go and find your books and follow you in your socials, and how do they come and learn about you?
Yeah, so combat codes, I'll hold it up here. Just I always have a copy of combat codes. So that's the first one.
Excellent.
The third one, it's a trilogy. The third one's actually out on December 3rd this year. So it'll
Okay.
be completed. I know a lot of readers won't read until it's a completed trilogy because they don't want to wait. So it'll be completed. And you
Okay.
can buy those wherever books are sold. If you go to Barnes and Nobles, it should be on the shelf in the sci-fi fantasy section or your hopefully your local indie bookstore, or you can of course go to Amazon or and if you're a listener, I know a lot of jiu-jitsu guys and girls are listeners. You can do it on Audible or
Okay.
Spotify or app, and pretty much anywhere, UK, US and UK. have a different release date. But if you're in the UK, you can listen. And then there's translations in Russia and a few different countries now. We want to get Brazil though. That would be
Okay, yeah,
awesome.
come on,
We're
get your
still working
Portuguese.
on the Portuguese translation. If anyone is in publishing in Brazil that listens to this, come on, guys, we got to get the
Okay,
Portuguese
yeah, I love that.
translation going.
I love that. That's amazing. And did you read it by any chance? Are you the audible? Are you the voice of the story if you buy it?
I would be terrible at that. Again, as far as skill acquisition, that is a whole nother skill. No, there's a
Yeah.
wonderful narrator. He does all the like different
Oh,
dialects in the
okay. Yeah,
world.
yeah, yeah. Nice.
Yeah, it's really I haven't listened to the entire book. And
Yeah,
after you
you
write the
wrote
book,
it.
you kind of want to be like, I don't want to listen to my own book. But everyone has had great feedback, and he's done a fantastic job
Yeah.
in all three books.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm a Audible subscriber, so my Audible
Yes,
credit,
I'd love to hear it.
I will give it a listen. Leave my glowing review as well. Well, this was a pleasure. Maybe you'll come back and see us another time. We can talk more about it. And congratulations on finishing out the trilogy. You know, that's extraordinary achievement and all the success in all these different areas, Professor Alex. It's great to talk.
Thank you so much, B. I love again, whenever I talk to folks that are in the jiu-jitsu world, I come out feeling refreshed and kind of like reminding myself why I had this initial
Yeah,
inspiration and just why I love jiu-jitsu.
that's so wonderful.